Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something I think many of us wonder about. As AI gets, well, smarter, how do we know if it's actually right? Especially with really complex stuff.
Exactly. It's a huge challenge. Sometimes you get an answer, maybe from an AI, maybe just anywhere, and there's no simple way to check it.
Right. No easy answer key.
And that's the core problem in these advanced AI models. How do we trust their reasoning, particularly in super specialized fields, like, say, PhD level probability, where even the experts might argue?
Okay, so you pointed me to this really interesting research paper. It's called Collective Reasoning Among LLMs, a framework for answer validation without ground truth. Quite a title.
It is, yeah. And it hints at the core idea.
Which it
Basically, understanding how multiple AIs, these large language models, can sort of work together.
to check each other's work.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
To assess if answers are correct, how good the reasoning is, even evaluate the questions themselves. And the key part is doing this without having a predefined correct answer, the ground truth.
That sounds almost paradoxical, doesn't it? How can they know they're right without knowing what's right?
Well, it's fascinating. The researchers took inspiration from a couple of places. One is the wisdom of crowds idea we see with humans.
Right, like asking a big group instead of one person.
Exactly. And also from machine learning itself, something called ensemble learning, where you combine multiple models.
So the basic idea is strength in numbers, combining different AI brains.
That's the core principle, yeah.
Mhm.
By bringing together different models, each trained differently, with maybe different strengths and weaknesses, you hope to get a more reliable result than just trusting one single AI.
Which, as you said, is super important for things like advanced statistics. I mean, verifying a PhD level probability answer, that's
Ah,
not trivial.
Definitely not. Manual checking would be incredibly time-consuming and difficult.
So who are the AIs involved in this study? Which models did they use?
They used four big names: GPT-4 0125 Preview,
Okay, familiar one.
Meta's Llama Bay 370B Instruct, Claude 3 Opus, and Gemini 1.5 Flash. So really, some of the leading models out there right now.
The current A-list, basically. So how did they set this up? What did the experiment actually look like?
They designed it so the models took turns. One model would generate a PhD-level probability multiple choice question.
Okay, acting as the question setter.
Right. And then the other three models would independently try to answer that question. They did this for 100 questions total.
So one model writes the test, the others take it. But you mentioned something crucial about the answer.
Yes, exactly. The models answering the question did not know the correct answer that the question-generating model had decided on.
Ah, okay, so the answer key was kept hidden from the solvers.
Precisely. It simulates that real-world scenario where you don't have that perfect ground truth to just check against.
Makes sense, but how did they make sure the questions were actually good? Genuinely PhD level and covering the right topics?
They had a structured approach. They used what they call a concept map of advanced probability.
Like a curriculum outline.
Sort of, yeah. Covering things like probability distributions, Bayesian methods, stochastic processes, all the advanced stuff. They'd randomly pick topics from this map for each question.
So it ensures coverage and avoids bias towards one area.
Right. And the prompt given to the model writing the question specifically asked for PhD level difficulty, something that tests deep understanding, not just recall.
Okay. And that model also generated the answer options and the explanation, I assume?
It did. It generated the question, the multiple choice options, flagged the correct one, and provided an explanation. But again, only the question and the options went to the answering models.
Got it. The explanation and the correct flag were just for the researchers later on.
Exactly. For their analysis.
Okay, so the stage is set. Tough questions. 3 AI solvers working blind without the answer key. How do you then figure out what's likely correct? This is where that collective intelligence comes in, right?
It is. The researchers focused heavily on intermodal agreement. How often did the three answering models agree with each other?
The assumption being, if multiple independent AIs all land on the same answer.
Then that answer has a higher probability of actually being correct. It's an intuitive idea, really.
Okay. So what kinds of agreement did they measure? Was it just yes or no?
They broke it down. There was full agreement. All three answering models chose the same option.
Okay.
Partial agreement, where two models agreed, but the third picked something else.
Right.
And no agreement where all three picked different answers.
Simple enough categories. But how did they analyze this beyond just counting? You mentioned statistics earlier.
Yes, they used several methods. One key one was the majority vote.
So if 2 or more AIs picked answer B, then B is the consensus.
That's it. That's the consensus answer.
But Just because they agree doesn't automatically mean they're right, does it? How did they check the quality of that consensus?
Ah, good question. That's where the reliability metric came in. This measured how often the majority vote consensus answer actually matched the original correct answer that the question-generating model had set aside.
Ooh, clever. So they did use that hidden answer P, but only afterwards to see how reliable the AI consensus was.
Exactly. It was the benchmark to evaluate the collective guess.
What other tools did they use to kind of dig into the numbers?
They calculated confidence intervals using a method called bootstrap resampling.
Okay, what does that tell you?
It gives you a range, basically.
Hmm.
It tells you how stable or relevable that agreement percentage is. A narrower range means you can be more confident the result isn't just a fluke.
So tighter interval means more trustworthy agreement.
Generally, yes. More consistent reliability. They also used a chi-square test.
I've heard of that one. That checks if results are statistically significant.
Right. Is the agreement pattern we're seeing real, or could it have just happened by random chance?
Okay.
And finally, Fleiss kappa. This is a specific measure for agreement among multiple raters in this case. The AI model's accounting for agreement that might happen purely by chance.
Wow, okay, so a pretty thorough statistical toolkit to analyze the AI team's performance.
Definitely. They weren't just eyeballing it.
So after all that, running the 100 questions through these four models, what did they find? What were the big takeaways?
Well, some clear differences between the models emerged. For instance, Claude and Gemini, when they were the ones answering, showed the highest levels of full agreement.
Meaning, when Claude or Gemini generated a question, the other three AIs were more likely to all agree on the same answer.
No, the other way around.
Yeah.
When Claude and Gemini were part of the answering group, they more often agreed with each other and the third model. This suggests that perhaps the questions generated by other models were clearer to them, or maybe they are just more aligned in their reasoning on these types of problems. But another related finding
Okay.
was about the questions they generated. Questions generated by Claude and Gemini seemed to lead to higher agreement among the answering models.
Okay. So maybe their questions were less ambiguous.
Yeah.
Easier for the other AIs to converge on an answer.
That's a likely interpretation, yes. Clearer questions, more consistent answers from the group.
What about the other end of the scale? Any model stand out differently?
Llama showed the lowest rate of full agreement when its questions were being answered, and the highest rates of partial and no agreement.
Suggesting its questions might have been interpreted more variably? Or perhaps were just harder in a way that caused divergence?
Possibly, yes. More variability in how the answering AIs approached the problems it set. It tells us that different models might have distinct styles or abilities in formulating these complex questions.
Interesting. Okay, what about that reliability metric? How often did the majority vote consensus actually match the hidden correct answer?
Majority vote percentages were generally pretty high for all models, meaning it was common for at least two AIs to agree.
Okay, so consensus was frequent.
Yes, but the reliability of that consensus, whether it matched the question generator's intended answer, varied more.
And who came out on top there?
Claude had the highest reliability. Its consensus answers most often matched the original correct answer, followed by GPT-4 and Gemini, which were quite close. And Llama, again, had the lowest reliability score here.
And did the confidence intervals back this up?
They did. Claude had the narrowest interval, suggesting its high reliability was quite consistent.
Consistent performance.
Exactly. Whereas Llama had the widest interval, indicating more variability, less precision in its consensus reliability.
And the significance tests. Chi-square, Fleiss kappa. Did the agreement look like a real pattern?
For GPT-4, Claude, and Gemini, the chi-square test showed the agreement was statistically significant, definitely not just random chance.
Okay.
Llama's agreement was statistically weaker by comparison, and Fleiss kappa gave substantial agreement for Gemini, moderate for Claude, and fair for GPT-4 and Llama. Different statistical lenses giving slightly different shades, but painting a consistent picture.
So, summarizing the findings then. It seems Claude and Gemini were generally stronger, both in generating questions that led to consensus and in forming reliable consensus answers themselves. Llama showed more variability, maybe more ambiguous questions, or less consistent reasoning alignment.
That's a fair summary of the key findings, yeah.
So, stepping back, what's the big deal here? What are the main implications of this research? Why should we care?
I think it's quite significant. It offers a novel framework, a new way to think about validating AI knowledge, especially in these really complex areas where we don't have a readily available ground truth.
Like a new quality control mechanism for AI reasoning.
Kind of, yes.
Yeah.
It provides actual empirical evidence that this multi-model collaboration thing can work. It can boost the reliability of the answers and even give us clues about the quality of the questions being asked.
That feels important. Where could you see this being applied?
Oh, several areas. Educational tech is one. Imagine AI helping generate and validate really tough exam questions.
Okay, yeah.
Automated assessment in professional fields, maybe even in scientific research, helping validate findings in niche, complex domains.
So AI helping AI and maybe helping humans check AI work too.
Yeah,
Yeah, kind of mind-bending.
it is. And it raises further questions, too.
Like what? Did the researcher suggest next steps?
They did. One idea is to bring human experts into the loop. Compare the AI consensus not just to the original generator's answer, but to what human PhDs think.
Benchmarking against human expertise. That would be telling.
Definitely. Another area is looking into how biases might creep in or get amplified when AIs collaborate like this. That's always a concern.
Right, groupthink, but for AI. Okay, this has been really illuminating. For me, the big takeaway is this whole idea of building trust through consensus, not just relying on one AI oracle, but seeing if multiple diverse AI minds converge.
Exactly. And that they can achieve a degree of reliable consensus even without the answer key is the really powerful part.
It really does mirror that wisdom of crowds idea, doesn't it? Leveraging diversity for a potentially more robust outcome.
Precisely. And the differences observed also highlight that these models aren't monolithic. They have unique characteristics.
Makes you wonder where else this could go. Applying collective AI intelligence to other verification nightmares. Maybe scientific discovery, or even understanding really complex social dynamics.
That's a great thought to leave with. Where else can collective reasoning, AI or human, help us tackle problems where the truth is hard to pin down?
And if people want to get into the nitty-gritty of the stats or the specific results.
The paper itself, 25LE2.20758V1.pdf, has all the details. It really makes you think, what other techniques could we develop to make AI collaboration even more reliable? How do we keep pushing this?
Lots to ponder there. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with me today. Really fascinating stuff.
My pleasure. It's an important area.
Until next time.